I'm Matt Byram, and this is the Marketing Strategies Podcast, where I speak with interesting and well-respected marketers from high-growth companies. We'll discuss the strategies they've used to generate traffic, acquire new users, and grow their business.
I know on day 30 if you are going to renew or churn on day 365.
It's a little bit of mind control.
You need to reach the leads in a specific time frame. The faster, the better.
When something works, don't do more like it, do more with it.
If you're selling to a very finite audience, an inbound model is going to be grossly inefficient.
This audience has what top questions, and then make sure that you have an answer to each of their questions.
We don't hire professional writers to write for the blog. We hire sales operations practitioners.
Whoever gets closest to the customer wins.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Marketing Strategies Podcast. Today I'm joined by Hana Abaza, who is Head of Marketing for Shopify Plus. Before that, she was VP of Marketing for Uberflip. I'm excited to speak with Hana about her time at Uberflip, where they grew from a small team of over 75 people, and then how the culture, tactics and strategies are different at a large company like Shopify. So as well as being the head of marketing for one of the world's biggest e-commerce platforms, Hana contributes to sites like Entrepreneur, Huffington Post, and she also shares her expertise in the form of webinars, presentations, and she's a self-confessed podcast junkie, which I'm glad she's with us today. So let's dive right in. How are you today, Hana?
I'm great, Matt. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fantastic today. It's lovely to have you with me today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
So we first met when you were at Uberflip, and it says online on your bio and things that Uberflip was a small business at the time. I just wanted to know, what position was the business in when you joined?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting story. So when I first joined Uberflip, it was actually a small team. I think I was employee number 20, and they were really on the precipice of a pretty fundamental change in their business, their market, who they were going after. I hate using the term pivot because it wasn't even a pivot. It was like we're going to stop doing this thing for this market and we're going to do a different thing for a different market. But
that's all part of business growth, really, isn't it? Actually finding your way. So that's just part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, for people who might not be familiar with Uberflip at the time, they were really focused on this tool that they had built called Flipbooks, which really was a tool that sort of took PDFs and converted it to sort of this online digital sort of flipbook experience. You might remember those magazines that you would sort of see online and you literally flip them online, quote unquote.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that was really what they were focused on, and they saw some good success with that. But then saw a really big opportunity in the content marketing space as they actually started to see less publishers and magazines and more marketers and content marketers and B2B marketers start to use the tools for things like ebooks and white paper. Now this was years ago when there's a lot of hype around content marketing, and I think it's one of those things that it existed before the hype. It continues to exist after the hype, although I don't know that the hype is over. And it's one of those areas where marketers didn't always have the infrastructure and foundation to be able to execute on content in the way that they wanted to, right? And that's really where Uberflip started to play around in the content marketing space and really started to build the foundation of what would eventually be sort of that Uberflip platform that really helped marketers manage content at scale and use it for things like sales enablement and across various stages of the buyer journey in a way that was much more conducive to speed of execution and to creating a really great experience and to lead gen and to growth. So I joined, as I said, employee number 20, and I think on my website it does say 75, but I think when I left Uberflip, I was there for about 3.5 years. We were over 100 people, I believe, at that point. Yeah. So really great growth in those few years, but it was really interesting because in the early stages, we were really trying to figure out product market fit, right? And initially, we actually thought it was going to be for small business. The model was very different. It was online, self-serve, free trial, and for marketers listening, that is a very different funnel, and it's actually much closer to B2C than it is B2B. And you're going to be using different growth mechanisms to actually, get people to sign up and upgrade and activate, and it's often very product led. Turns out we were totally wrong, and we shifted way up market, which completely changes your business model, right? So instead of being sort of free trial online self-serve, now it's like, oh, we need to build a sales team. And we are actually getting a ton of traction in the enterprise space, and really interestingly in B2B. Companies specifically. And like any startup for a while, it's like, oh, we can do both. Can't we do both? Where, still had the free trial, but then let's experiment with an enterprise option on the pricing page and see how many people click on that. So the reality is, for most startups, doing both is usually, in my opinion, not always a great idea because it splits your focus and it splits your resources. I think, there are some instances where a self-serve model actually is conducive and can be a bit of a feeder to sort of that enterprise path, but we just weren't seeing that, right? And we just kind of had to make a decision to just kind of go all in on upmarket, and that made a ton of sense. And I think Uberflip is really seeing the success from that. So when I started, the marketing team was I think 3 people, including me. When I left, it had grown pretty significantly, and as is evident by the fact that the company grew significantly. So it was a great time, and it's a lot of fun marketing to marketers, which is what I spend a lot of time doing there.
Well, they keep you on your toes, definitely.
Oh, yeah, there is zero room for error, for sure. Zero room for error and zero room for bullshit. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to, swear on this, but on this podcast, but definite, BS detectors for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So Uberflip really started as a flip book, and then realized actually that there's a whole world out here, not just in content marketing, for example, not just books or actually presenting content, but actually being the platform for people to actually present content, generate leads it's almost like a whole journey, whole customer journey platform, really. And I guess that pivot that you mentioned wasn't necessarily a pivot; it was really actually broadening out the whole aspect of the business, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And we started seeing, really interesting companies, big companies, like I think, at the time, and I can't speak to the customer base now, but at the time, we were seeing, Microsoft and Schneider Electric and Salesforce and come in and actually build these really great content hubs and experiences through Uberflip. Because despite the fact that those companies had lots of tools and lots of infrastructure and they were using different types of CMSs, oftentimes those weren't cutting it from the perspective of actually building out that experience for their customers.
So talk to me about the strategies that you actually employed to get the Uberflip brand in front of these companies. How did they hear about you in the main at that particular time? Once you'd actually realised the direction that you were going in, and you'd actually had a proper direction, how did these companies find out about Uberflip, and what were the early stages of you understanding your growth story?
Yeah, it really did come down to a whole lot of experimentation. Initially, I think, the tactics are the tactics. I think everybody would, no major surprises there in terms of we, tried certain paid channels. We tried, SEO as a focus. Content was a huge focus. Co-marketing and partner marketing was actually a really big focus as well. And as we were sort of trying all of these different tactics, what we did see was one of the specific things that worked really well for us in terms of generating net new leads, but also really highly qualified leads was actually webinars, which, to be honest, surprised me at the time. I'm like, oh, webinars, everybody does webinars, but nobody was really doing it for that segment of the market in the way that we were doing it. And I think, that sort of speaks also to, quality content, right? So that was probably one of the biggest growth levers, at least initially. And that sort of got built out into sort of a full-fledged sustainable funnel in and of itself. So
I was going to say, so you saw a bit of growth in webinars, and then did you effectively double down in that area and think, we've got to build a whole plan around webinars to make sure that we're doing as many quality webinars as possible?
Exactly. And that's a thing that's like, it's almost, once you operationally figure it out, it's easy to build a sustainable program around that. What gets trickier then is like the distribution of it, right? So really getting creative in terms of like how we would continue to distribute those webinars. Because, I mean, putting on the webinar is one thing, but getting people to register for the webinar is like a different thing, right? So where we would see some really good successes there is variability in the types of partners that we were actually leveraging for those webinars. So for something like partner marketing and webinars and stuff like that, for it to be really working and impactful from a bottom line perspective, I think it's all about the approach. So I think, you have to put volumetary metric in terms of the actual number of registrants, and you really need to focus on sort of quality and intent. And that intent piece, I think, comes in from the topic, right? So for example, there were typically two buckets of webinars that we would do. One would be really sort of very focused topic, very high intent. So for example, how to use predictive analytics for content marketing. Like, unless you're really qualified, you're probably not going to sign up for that thing, right? That's probably not going to happen.
That's pretty specific.
Yeah, it's very, very specific. So, we would get maybe 500 people signing up for a webinar like that. And that would be something that we would do with, maybe a partner like one of the predictive analytics platforms.
That's
there
good
are
numbers.
several out there. Yeah. And it didn't, that was sort of the consistent once we built it up. But, the very first few that we did was like 150 people maybe, right? So,
is that how many people show up, or is that how many people register?
That's typically how many people register. At the time, we were seeing about a 30 to 40% attendee rate, and then we would see a pretty significant replay rate as well. It would vary a little bit from webinar to webinar. So those were decent for net new. Those were actually also great for driving pipe further down the funnel, right? So we would see those types of things actually influence and kick somebody over into a sales conversation. So it was really interesting to see those types of webinars and the actual direct impact on MRR. And then the other type of webinar that we would do would be more that audience growth type thing, where it was still on topic, but a little higher in the funnel, and also a little bit more geared towards a bit of a broader topic or audience. So, one great example of that is I think we did a webinar with, I think it was HubSpot at the time, and the topic was something around like how to create, conversion-centered content or something like that. Something to do with conversion and content. So like that was much broader, because who doesn't want to write content that converts?
Well, absolutely, yeah.
Exactly. So for us, that type of thing would get, into the thousands of registrants. Or when we did things with like an AMA with, a really sort of senior executive at a really prominent company, those kinds of things would also get lots and lots of registrants. But not always sort of heavy on intent, right? Not necessarily ready to buy. So I think a healthy mix of both of those makes for a really good program. And I'm using webinars as an example, but I think that approach across many channels could potentially be effective.
And did you then use the webinars on demand afterwards to carry on generating leads into the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where actually Uberflip as the platform came up. So with Uberflip, it integrated with our video hosting, and we literally were able to just automatically pull in those webinars to a content hub using Uberflip, and we would gate them right away. The forms that we would gate them with were integrated with the marketing automation tool we were using. So, and all of this was done really quickly and easily in a matter of clicks via the marketing team, right? So there wasn't a heavy load in terms of developers. So, that was the thing that the Uberflip platform was really great for.
And would you see a higher, watch to customer conversion from somebody actually attending the webinar to actually somebody watching it on demand later? Is there a lot more success with a webinar when people watch it live?
Yeah, I think what happens, if I'm remembering correctly, velocity was better for people to watch it live. And what I mean by that is like they would convert faster, not necessarily at a much higher percentage, because those webinars lived sort of on an ongoing basis, right? So like they're somebody could come in and watch a webinar from a year ago and convert, right? So it was a little bit less about a much higher conversion rate, but typically we would see those people actually convert much faster. And I suspect it's because like they are actively engaged in finding a solution to the thing they watched a webinar for, because they actually watched the webinar, right? So they're probably a little bit more.
There's a big commitment, really.
It is, yeah. It really, really is.
Yeah, to actually spend a time, an hour out of your day, which is, I guess, unplanned. Really, it's kind of just fits in where you've not asked for it to be, but that's where it is. To actually spend time out the day to learn something is this big commitment. So, would you say that webinars then were your biggest driver of new leads and new business?
Yeah, I mean, I there was a period in time where they definitely were. I'm trying to think now if we had any channels sort of overtake. The one channel that actually I was surprised by that actually performed quite well, both from a net new leads as well as an influencing pipeline standpoint, was actually events. And I was, at the time, one of those super skeptical, oh, really? You want me to go to a trade show? Kind of marketers, but and they are trickier to track for sure. But we were seeing a really significant ROI on those. And that's much easier when you're up market, because it doesn't actually take that many deals to, number one, cover your cost, and number two, see a really great ROI, particularly if your LTV is relatively high. But I know that was pretty successful. The tricky part with online channels for a much more niche audience is they're only so scalable, right? So when you look at a B2C play, or when you look at, people that are going after small business where it is still a self-serve funnel, right? And oftentimes small business funnels are just very similar to consumer, right? It's easier to use some of these broader channels and just go for volume, because there's not a huge cost to running more of those people through your funnel, right? Whereas if you have a sales team, there's a heavy lift there if you're pushing more and more unqualified people through that funnel. So, on the B2C side, when you've got a self-serve funnel, you usually have a lot more room to scale big channels like paid search and, potentially even paid social. And generally you're going to get more volume on SEO initiatives. Generally you're going to get more volume on a lot of things, right? Generally the topics from content are just like broader topics and attract more people. So it is very much a volume play. Obviously quality comes into account. Whereas with a B2B funnel, you have to more quickly add additional channels and layers of growth, because there's a cap on how scalable they are before you start just getting bad leads, right? So it's interesting. The approach, I think, for both is a bit different.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know, I've followed Uberflip for a long time, and I've known you for a while. That Uberflip creates, I do realise that you've moved on to Shopify now, and we'll move on to that. But yeah. I'm still very interested in the backstory. And Uberflip, you scaled content creation to a large scale. Really, you guys created a lot of content, really. And how did that come about? Did you create it in-house, or did you put together a plan and use some freelancers, some agencies and things like that? How did you decide to actually scale content while keeping quality high?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason content was a direction we did go in is because Uberflip is a content platform, and what we really wanted to do was we wanted to be the best example of how to use it, which is again part of the reason why we really doubled down on content. Here's the thing, though. I don't think we created as much content as people thought we did. I think we were just really good at making it seem like we were bigger than we were.
Like repurposing content, or?
Yeah, so part of it was repurposing content, part of it was being really efficient, part of it was actually focusing a lot on distribution, so our content was everywhere. Part of it, so it was all of those tactics. So the content team at Uberflip, when I was there, was never more than, I would say 2.5 or 3 people, right? Okay. Everything was done in-house. Like everything was done in-house. We did take guest blog posts, we did take guest contributors, but all of what we did was in-house. And it's funny because I hear that a lot, like, oh my God, you guys scaled it. You must have 10 people on your content team, or use a massive network of freelancers, et cetera, et cetera. And we didn't. We were just smart in how we approached it, right? For example, every webinar is turned into a blog post, right?
Yeah.
That's relatively easy to do because the content's there. It's not like you have to come up with it from thin air. So, those were the types of just tactics we use in terms of being able to really get the most bang for our buck. And after a while, we actually focus a lot less on creation, a lot more on distribution, a lot more on republishing. We actually ran an experiment where we took a 2-week content hiatus where we actually created 0 net new content.
Okay. What was the
we
result?
did was we actually so here's what's funny. So we actually used to send a daily email to our blog subscribers. And we always went back and forth on daily, not daily, weekly, bi-weekly, what's the frequency, right? And as much as we don't want to spam people's inboxes, I find that marketers actually often underestimate how much actual email you can send somebody and they have a tolerance for it, right? Especially if it's good stuff. So what we actually did was we took a 2-week hiatus from creating new blog posts, which means, okay, what are we going to do with those daily emails? Because the email would include the new blog post for the day, right? So what we actually did was we went back through our analytics. We actually took the top performing posts and we experimented a little bit with that. So we kind of took top performing just from an engagement perspective. So traffic and actual engagement, time on the actual post, just indicative as to whether or not they read it, also any clicks. And then we also looked at conversion on that as well. And we actually created a really tailored email campaign for those 2 weeks that actually resent those top performing blog posts. And click-through rates went up, engagement went up, open rates went up, right? So we actually use that as an opportunity to change our strategy when somebody new signs up for the blog in the first place. Because what happens at most companies when somebody new signs up for the blog is they will actually just be thrown into an email nurture that will just start whenever they sign up. So they'll just get the next post, right?
Yes, correct.
Whereas what we did was we almost created a 2-week blog subscribe onboarding email campaign where they would get not just the next post that's published, but actually the highest performing posts, right?
That makes sense.
And then they would get rolled over into the more regular drip. So that was actually really interesting. We actually, I think, saw a lift in traffic over those 2 weeks, which I couldn't fully explain. I don't think that could be explained through just the email campaigns. So yeah, it was really interesting. So, all of that to say that, I think most content teams overemphasize the content creation side of it. And don't get me wrong, that's still really important. But don't do it at the expense of making sure that your distribution side is covered.
And it totally makes sense, really, doesn't it, when you think about it, that, sending people not just the next piece of content that comes along will be the best strategy, but actually sending people, the top performing content. We actually do the same thing. So people enter our funnel, for example, and then based on what they've downloaded or viewed or done, the action that they've taken, they'll actually receive our top content in that area. So, and then, like you say, then they'll go on to receiving some other general, more recent stuff. But we also found the same thing, that totally works as a strategy for us to find the best content and send that to people first.
Yeah, I think in general, just being a little bit more intentional about what we send people. It doesn't have to be complicated, but and maybe it's not the best performing content. Maybe you actually know a little bit about your subscribers, and you can send them things that are relevant to their job or their interests or their topic, depending on how much data you have, right?
Yeah, I think relevancy is just really key. The more relevant that you can make things, the better for each person.
Yeah.
And so
I agree.
When you created content, then did you have a mini content promotion strategy in terms of, say, for example, you did a webinar, write that up as a blog? Would you then send that out as an email so that people could watch if they didn't watch, put it on social media, these sorts of things, and any paid promotion there as well? Did you have a strategy that you followed, like every piece of content had the same promotion strategy?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely did have a strategy that would change a little bit based on what we learned from the last time, and also based on like who we were partnered with and what the topic would be. So some of them we put some paid juice behind, some of them we didn't. At the time, actually, LinkedIn was working quite well from a paid perspective. I find in my experience, if you're in B2B, LinkedIn can be potentially really powerful, but it works best in the context of sponsoring content, right? Like I've never seen it work well for like direct response, sign up now, request a demo type of ad. But it does work, I think, really well from a content perspective, and it's also great in terms of targeting. So we would do that a lot for a lot of the content. And I mean, what webinars is the thing we're talking about, but like we would do similar things around like guides or ebooks or white papers. So that was a lot of what we would do, and how we promoted it also sort of came down to whether or not we were partnering with somebody on the webinar. And I'm a really huge advocate of doing co-marketing and partner marketing, but I mean, I think that there's a few caveats there. So like, I think a lot of people want to do it. I think most people don't do it in a way that's actually beneficial, particularly startups, actually. I always laugh when I see startups trying to do partner marketing or co-marketing with other startups when like nobody has any customers in the first place. So what's the point? So that's one pet peeve of mine. But I think like if you have audience fit, so if you both have a very similar audience, I think that's a good approach to do it. And if you are working in sort of an industry or providing tools or platforms that are complementary and sort of adjacent to each other, I think that could work really well. And then that also just becomes part of your promotion strategy, right? Is like literally you're just mixing and mingling your databases. So yeah, that works well.
We did an interesting thing through our brand Publish, actually, which was we did a day called Publish Growth Day, and I think we had 8 or 9 different presentations and then 3 interviews as well. So it was, say, 11 to 12 people, different companies, different audiences, and everybody got exposure to each other's audiences. So it's like you were 10 timesing your audience exposure by being part of the day. And for the customers, or for the people that were joining the day and watching the presentations, they got to view lots of different things and dip in and out on during the day, and also got all the different things to watch on demand afterwards. So it's kind of like a webinar it's like a sharing of 2 audiences, where we were like sharing 10 to 12 different audiences. It was very, very interesting for all the partners, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember we used to do similar things with some of the partners in the content space, where one partner would host like an AMA with the CMO of Slack or whatever it might be, and then there would literally be a group of about half a dozen companies that would sort of co-promote and kind of, I guess, co-sponsor. So like you're literally getting a mix and mingle of all those databases. Now, one thing I will say is like there is a bit of a decay there in terms of net new, right? Because if you keep doing that every quarter with the same partners, I mean, they only build up their databases so fast, right? And also if you're all playing in the same space, you already have a lot of like overlap in your databases.
There's going to be crossover.
So I mean, that's again, like we're back to the whole point of in B2B, where the audience is much more niche and much more focused. Every channel, every tactic is like only so scalable, right? The other thing we used to do that actually we saw some success with is we used to work a lot with publishers. For example, Marketing Profs, Content Marketing Institute, those types of things where you almost get the same effect, right? Where we work with them on sort of a lead gen campaign around a piece of content, like an ebook or a webinar or, a white paper. And we saw good results from that. But what we did see if we did it too frequently is a pretty sharp decline in net new leads, because again, it takes them time to build up their own databases. So, if you're working with a publisher, we couldn't really work with the same publisher for, more than a couple of months at a time. And then we would have to give it, a quarter before we went back to them in order to really see an advantage in net new leads, because it's just going to go to the same people. And there is a little bit of, I guess, nurture side to that, and a little bit of an awareness and influence side to that. But I'd much rather nurture them with our own emails and content once I have them, versus trying to do that through a third-party publisher, right?
Yeah, you give away a little bit of control, really, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, so now you're at Shopify, and how, obviously you're going from a small startup, fast growing, found its niche, scaled well, but now Shopify, which is, a much larger company, a much bigger scale. And I guess you fit into Shopify in a slightly different way. And how are things different in a bigger, more established company like Shopify as compared to Uberflip?
Oh man, a lot of things are different. A lot of things are the same. So let me provide some context into what it is that I do at Shopify and how Shopify has evolved over the years. So Shopify historically, and for those of you that may not be familiar, it's started off as an e-commerce platform, and historically Shopify has been focused on entrepreneurs and really small business. So that B2C type funnel that we talked about earlier, where it's sort of online, it's self-serve, you sign up for a free trial, you upgrade, you activate, you start using the platform, etc. So the growth mechanisms for that, again, as we discussed earlier, are a little bit different from B2B. But as Shopify grew and, as it, really started to see scale and success and sort of move towards IPO, the team here saw an opportunity to really start to cater to big merchants, because what we were seeing was, customers on Shopify would actually grow, and they were no longer small businesses or small entrepreneurs. They were actually really big, really successful companies doing really, really well. And one of two things would happen. They would either leave and go to what they thought they needed as a quote unquote enterprise platform, right? Or they would just stay on Shopify and they would just make it work, right? And we were seeing more and more of these people stay on Shopify, and we were like, hey, what can we actually do for them to make this better, right? What plan can we offer? What, product adjustments can we make? What services need to be there? So, until we started considering this, there was no such thing as customer success at Shopify, right? It was literally touchless. Like, people would buy without talking to anybody. Obviously, we talked to customers from a research UX standpoint, but in terms of the actual commercialization side, that never really existed. So true startup fashion. Basically, I'm pretty sure what happened was, and this was before my time, but I think they just threw enterprise on the pricing page, much like we did at Uberflip. And it was like, let's see what happens. Yeah, exactly. Which, really speaks to the sort of growth mindset here at Shopify that's really sort of sustained through its, scale as a company. And what initially started off as a mechanism to keep people on Shopify actually evolved into, hey, wait a minute, there's like a huge white space in this quote unquote enterprise e-commerce area, right? So as we started to dig into that, we saw that, hey, wait a minute, the solutions that are available right now for enterprise are either A, not very good, right? Very clunky, very high total cost of ownership. A lot of the solutions are SaaS, and they're actually still on premise, which coming from the marketing tech space, I was shocked by. I was like, how is this not SaaS? Like, why are people scared of cloud? I don't understand. But that really was sort of the perspective of a lot of people in this industry, and it was actually really interesting and fascinating to see. And other enterprise e-commerce solutions were incredibly expensive, like hugely expensive. So for people that maybe were not small businesses, but weren't like $1 billion plus, big CPGs, there wasn't a whole lot of options for them. And the options that were there were frankly just not strong from a technology standpoint, and not a good experience, required a lot of developers, required you to have servers, which is crazy, right? So Shopify started experimenting with, hey, like maybe there's actually a play for us to come in and, as much as I hate this term, like for lack of a better one, disrupt that space a little bit. And really that's what we started to do. And more, we're actually seeing the majority of our business start to come, not from people staying on Shopify and upgrading to Plus, but actually from the market itself and people moving over from competitor platforms, which is really really interesting to see. So now if you step back and you look at Shopify as a whole, it's like, oh, there's Shopify, and then there's Shopify Plus, which is a completely different business model. Now we have a sales team. Now we have a customer success team. Now growth and marketing means a different thing in that context, right? So when I actually came, it was a really unique opportunity for me. So just background, like, I have known Shopify for years. I grew up in Ottawa, where Shopify was headquartered. I remember going to meetups in Shopify's office when they were a 40-person startup, right? So it was really amazing to actually kind of watch their trajectory and then be here. And I think, when I was starting to, explore what my next step would be, I met with Craig Miller, who at the time was the CMO of Shopify. He's now the Chief Product Officer. And we were just chatting through, the space and some of our options. And, at the time I was like, oh, maybe I'll move to San Francisco. I don't know, what there is in Toronto. I'm not sure. And he's like, well, before you move, you should explore Shopify. And I was like, Shopify? What am I going to do at Shopify? Because I really wanted to stay sort of up market. And he's like, no, there's this thing called Shopify Plus that's like, it's a thing and it's big and it's going to scale and it's going to be amazing. So it was introduced to Lauren Paddleford, who's the GM for Shopify Plus, and just kind of, everything happened from there. So I lead marketing for Plus, which is basically, a product line within Shopify. And we focus on that up market. That's our audience. Plus is about 300 people, I believe, within Shopify. And Shopify, I think, is probably, I should know this by now, probably around 3,000 people, something like that. While a lot of things are different, when I look at just Plus, not that different, except for sort of the scale at which we're doing things, right?
Yeah. And is it run like a startup inside a big company then, or is it actually like, it's ingrained within the business?
Yeah, it sort of is, or it definitely was when it initially started. I think because it's gotten to the size and scale that it has, it is a little bit more ingrained into the business. I will say though, Shopify as a whole, and this was one of the things I was a little worried about coming in, because, it's kind of that, is it big companies, or, is it going to be hard to get stuff done? Shopify moves at a phenomenal pace and speed still, even though it's a publicly traded company. And that's something that I really hope we're able to preserve as we move forward.
Amazing. And you can tell by the amount of things that they put out and the freshness and the quality and things like that, that actually there is innovation going on in there constantly as well. And, when you come into Shopify Plus, for example, there's channels in place, you just keep working those channels, that we know what works, you keep working at this, or is there actually chance to test and experiment and innovate within those channels, new channels, and make a stamp on the role yourself?
Yeah, there definitely is that opportunity. And it's also really exciting because you can think about, not just optimizing existing channels, but there's also like, how else can we think about growth, right? How do we go beyond, the typical channels that any SaaS company would use in order to drive growth? And, what does growth even mean, right? And, at the same time that Shopify's expanded up market and focused on a bigger audience, we've kind of also moved the other direction as well. And we're building tools for people that aren't necessarily even ready to sell things from e-commerce, right? It's almost like a pre-e-commerce sort of realm. So really thinking about growth in a much, much broader way, which is the thing that really sort of excites me. And the thing to remember too is, for any company, like, you're going to figure out a channel, you're going to scale it, and it's just you're going to double down on it. But, years go by, or even months go by, and there's oftentimes you go back and, this onboarding email campaign hasn't been touched in a year and it was working really well, but like things have changed now. So do we actually go back and like tweak it? And, we did, and we saw a really great uptick from it. So there's always opportunities to go back because things are always changing, right?
And which strategies are currently bringing you the most users at the moment? What are your best channels for, say, acquisition?
Our best channels for acquisition. I don't know that I'm actually allowed to share that. But I will say, like, there's not huge surprises, right? I mean, there are only so many acquisitions channels. There's like paid social, there's paid search, there's SEO, there's content. There's, content is actually a big one for Shopify as well. I don't think any of the channels will be like super revolutionary for you. We have a really robust partner ecosystem. That's sort of another way. And I think the trick though is in the execution, right? And in the approach. And that's the piece that a lot of people gloss over. It's not really about the channel. It's about channel audience fit, right? And it's about your approach and the execution on the channel in and of itself.
Yeah. Okay, well, I appreciate that. I know you can't share some data. I appreciate the vagueness.
we can't give away all the secrets. Come on.
The secrets, yeah. That's what you're here for, surely. That's what people want to know. Okay, well,
I'll give you my secrets. I can't give you Shopify's.
In that case, which metrics are you really focusing on to, what are the core metrics for you guys to hit? Do you have like a North Star metric that you're all working towards?
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, a little bit different for every sort of, for product line. I can speak specifically to Plus. For us, we definitely have targets around, how many customers we want to get, how many leads we want to get. When we look at our funnel, my team is very focused sort of on optimizing for the bottom of the funnel. So really, how many opportunities are created for sales, right? And that totally changes your approach at the top of the funnel, right? Because again, then it becomes less about volume and more about intent across every single channel and tactic you're experimenting with, right? So, to give you an example, we recently actually tightened up some of the lead qualification parameters from one of the channels that was bringing in leads. So we actually saw like a pretty significant dip in volume, right? But we saw a significant increase in the number of opportunities created. So those are the types of things that my team is really focused on in the context of Plus. And things like, on the contact us page, we added an extra field. Did we see a drop in conversion? Yeah, we totally did. Did we see an increase in deal creation? Yeah, we totally did, right? So it's a big part of it is knowing what you're optimizing for. And also a big part of it too is making sure you're communicating that to everybody, because on the surface, people will be like, oh no, lead volume dropped. Oh no, everything's on fire. But you really have to make sure everybody else understands what the actual goal is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're tracking not just the initial metrics such as traffic or actual leads, but how are you then actually tracking further down the funnel in terms of opportunities to a lead source? Because obviously you mentioned that traffic's dropped, but opportunities have increased, which totally means that you're getting less leads, but at a much higher quality, and it's much better. So that's actually a win, really. And how are you figuring that out in the whole marketing landscape and for different funnels and different lead sources?
Yeah, and that's the thing is like with certain lead sources, like it's almost, there's a whole bunch of micro funnels, right? So certain lead sources coming in, we'll see sort of that drop in actual lead volume, but an increase in actual, opportunity to deal creation. Other lead sources, we're seeing an increase in volume and sometimes also an increase in deal creation, sometimes a decrease, in which case we know we need to fix that, right? So it really, for us, is an amalgamation of like essentially a whole bunch of tools that help us track this stuff. That's something that is hard for everybody, I think, and it's really tricky tracking a lot of that. Multi-touch is a thing that we're thinking about a lot as well, and I know that's always a thing that I think every single company is thinking about, multi-touch attribution. So we track a lot of that through a combination of we use sort of marketing automation, we use a CRM, we use Google Analytics, we use just like a business intelligence tool that pulls from our data warehouse. So we use Mode, but I mean that's similar to something like Tableau. So those are the different tools that we use to actually pull some of those metrics. But we're constantly looking at how do we improve that infrastructure, right? How do we make it easier to pull reports? How do we make it easier to provide visibility? How do we make it quicker to dashboard all of these experiments that we're doing? So that's sort of how we're approaching it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic having, digital marketing, being able to track people from first touch all the way through to, after sales and things like that. But there's so many touches and so many tools and so many different metrics that can be tracked along the way. It's actually making that happen. And, there's always ways to actually improve that flow right the way through. So I can feel your pain.
Yeah. And I don't think I've ever been in a company that's like fully solved it, right?
No, who's done that?
No.
So what are the strategies that you're focusing on in 2018? What's important for you and your team?
Yeah, I think, this is going to be a little bit less of an executional tactical answer. My team's grown a ton in the last year. I think when I started at Shopify, I had 2 people. We went from 2 to 20 in 12 months. And we're still hiring a bunch more. So if anybody's listening to this and they're interested in Shopify, find me online. Shopify in general is hiring. So go look at our careers page. My TA person, my talent acquisition team will be very happy that I just gave that shout out. Yeah. But so honestly, a big thing for us is because things are just moving at such a rapid pace and growing so quickly. A big thing for us is making sure that nothing breaks in our workflows and how we work together and our infrastructure and our efficiency and because as you can imagine, if you go from 2 to 20 people in 12 months, stuff breaks every time you double the team, right? The tooling, how you do stuff. Do other people need eyes on something before it actually ships? So that's actually a big part of what we're focused on. Beyond that, from a marketing perspective, I mean, it's a lot of the stuff that I talked about, right? It's, how do we make sure that we're super efficient sort of at the bottom of the funnel, mid to bottom funnel? How do we make sure that we help sales be super efficient as well? So big focus on product marketing, positioning, and operationalizing all of that stuff. We've opened up offices in London and Melbourne. So we are hiring also internationally, and that's also going to require us to think a little bit more critically about localizing messaging and positioning for those markets. Yeah. So lots happening, and lots of balls up in the air.
Amazing. And the reason for opening different offices in different countries for yourself as Shopify, is that so that you can actually be a closer part of that market and that you can actually get into, say, more regular events and actually meet with the customers more often? Or what are the reasons for that?
Yeah, so for Plus, absolutely. It's all of those things. Shopify by default is global already, right? We have customers in, all the countries. And we also have teams internationally as well. We have a small team in India. We have a team, I think, in Japan. We have, teams already sort of sitting internationally. For Plus teams specifically, our first sort of intentional step into expanding internationally for right now is English-speaking companies. I'm sure that will evolve moving forward. And it's in areas where we already have traction. So London and more broadly sort of the UK and Ireland and parts of Europe, Melbourne, so more broadly Australia, New Zealand, English-speaking, Hong Kong and Singapore. And it is largely logistically, let's all be in the same time zone, particularly when it comes to the higher touch model, right? You want a salesperson who is in the same time zone. You want a customer success person who's in the same time zone, ideally. Ramping up our market presence, events, that kind of stuff. And also being a little bit more in touch with what's happening in that market. Every region has slight variations that require us to position the product a little bit differently, and the actual product might be a bit different in certain regions, right? So I'm thinking of things like payments might be a bit different in Australia than it is in the UK, and then just also thinking a little bit more around being in better touch with the actual customer. So all of those things I think come into play.
That's great. Thank you. Well, I'm going to take us to our last 5, which is 5 quick-fire questions. So number 1, what's your best piece of marketing advice?
My best piece of marketing advice, funnily, you are the second person to ask me that in 2 days. So I would say my best piece of marketing advice is don't be super myopically focused on marketing. And the reason I say that is because I actually think other domains will really inform your ability to be a better marketer, better than marketing would. So how does this manifest itself? Well, don't read marketing books, right? Read other things. Read, learn about statistics, learn about, decision making, read psychology books, right? Or if you're going to read marketing books, read the ones from the 60s that are like the old school copywriting books, or like Ogilvy on advertising. I find a lot of times marketers get really focused on learning about marketing, and obviously there needs to be some level of that. But I would say creativity thrives most at the intersection of different domains. So feed your mind with much broader things, because you will be better at your job as a marketer if you do that.
And I think that leads us nicely on to our second question, which is, can you recommend a book for our listeners?
Oh man, like I said, any of the copywriting books from the 60s or 70s, I love. Ogilvy on Advertising, if you haven't read it. Actually, an interesting one that I read a little while back is a book called Ogilvy Unpublished. I apparently am on this Ogilvy kick right now. But Ogilvy Unpublished is interesting because it's literally like a book full of his like memos and letters to people and these like manifestos that he's written for the company, and like very behind the scenes-ish, but it's fascinating to read. And actually, like one of the manifestos are like guides that he wrote in order to help guide the advertising for like this kitchen product that they were trying to sell. Actually, literally reads like a modern sales manual. It's super fascinating to read. So I would check that out. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. That sounds interesting. And I'll put that in the show notes as well, so other people can click and download and take a look at that as well. And what software tool couldn't you live without?
What software tool couldn't I live without? Oh man. I just started using this app called Bear Notes. And I'm actually not sure, like it's become my go-to app, or maybe it's Bear app. It's Bear. It's just like it's a note-taking app. That's it. But I just, for whatever reason, it's one that I'm actually using, which in the past when I've tried to use these, it hasn't always worked so well.
But that one works for you. That's cool.
Yeah, it does. It does.
We'll try and get the link for that as well. Bear app maybe, or Bear Notes. We'll find that out and we'll get a link.
Message me if you have an issue. It's like the icon is red with a white bear.
Okay, we'll check that out and put a link in the show notes as well.
Cool.
So number 4, what's your favorite example of a marketing campaign?
MailChimp did one recently. Maybe not that recently. It's like, it was something, MailChimp Brain, something like that. It was excellent. It was more of a product marketing type focus. They did a really great job with it. The other company that does a great marketing, just great marketing in general, is I think Wealthsimple. They did a great campaign. If you're not familiar with Wealthsimple, it's based in Canada. It's essentially like managing your investments and your finances, very much like Wealthfront in the US. I'm sure there's some sort of UK version. Fintech's huge right now. And they did a campaign around like what's essentially like a gift card that they were releasing that you could, give away over the holidays. But they actually did an excellent job in terms of execution there. So those are some interesting ones that I've seen in the past.
Oh, cool. Okay. And I know you're a podcast junkie, so this final question should be right up your street. What other podcasts do you listen to?
Oh man, I'm literally just opening up my podcast app. So lately I'm getting into The Daily, which is by the New York Times. It just gives you like a 30-minute, here's what's happening in the world kind of thing. Really liking Hidden Brain by NPR. Intercom's podcast is fantastic. Inside Intercom. Recode Decode is another really great one. I'm going to stop there. Otherwise, I will continue to read all of the podcasts that I'm looking at right
all
now.
of your list.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good few. There's a couple on there that I'll certainly check out as well that I've not had a look at yet, like the Intercom one.
Mm-hmm. It's a good one.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Hannah. It has been absolutely a pleasure talking to you today, and I really appreciate your time. I know we've given a lot to our listeners to take away from today as well, so thanks very much for your time and giving us your advice on marketing strategies.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Matt.
Thank you all for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with your friends. I'd also be extremely grateful if you could rate and review us on iTunes or the channel that you get this podcast through. Next week, I'm joined by Lucas Zalesny, who is Director of Organic Performance for ZPG PLC. They own some of the UK's most prominent property websites, including Zoopla, Uswitch, Prime Location, and Smart New Homes. Lucas gives a ton of tips around SEO and customer acquisition, so this is one you'll definitely want to tune in for. So until next time, I've been your host, Matt Byram.